I don't know where to start. Hi, my name is Hillary. I'm in my early 30s, and I started reading Twilight during quarantine. And this video is just gonna be about the first book, titled Twilight. I have my laptop here because I couldn't figure out another way to have all my thoughts in front of me so I could communicate them to you. It is, how long is this Google Doc? This is a 4-page Google Doc in size 11 Arial font. So there are a lot of thoughts. I was actually roughly in the target demographic when the books were first coming out. So the original book, Twilight, was published in 2005. I was in high school then. I did not read any of them. I also have not seen any of the movies. I heard about them, certainly. I had friends who read them. I think, in retrospect, I had a little bit of I'm not like the other girls about Twilight. I think I thought, I'm going to scooch more to this. I did read vampire novels, but I read Anne Rice. I was Anne Rice teen. I know a lot about this series, but mostly just through osmosis of it being like a huge pop cultural phenomenon and just learning things from hearing about them. But this is my first time actually bothering to actually read the books. Recently I've been hearing about this like Twilight Renaissance with people where people who read it when they were younger reread it and revisit it, and it's been cropping out on Tumblr and social media. I mostly found out about it through YouTube, mostly through Sarah Zed and through Tia of Strange Eons. Though my thinking about Twilight is also very much influenced by Lindsay Ellis's video, I'm sorry, Stephanie Meyer. You're more likely to watch any of those than this thing that I'm recording, but I'll link to them below anyway. Strange Eons has had several Twilight videos, so I'll probably only link to one or two, but all great creators on the subject of Twilight. Lindsay Ellis was a big part of changing my view on Twilight, though I think she is not the first person to express it, and I think I already had some other people pushing me in this direction before, but I definitely, certainly now, strongly feel that Twilight is silly, it's weird, it's problematic, but it's not more silly, weird, and problematic than a lot of very popular pop cultural franchises, and there's no logical reason to justify the hatedom of it. There's logical reasons to criticize it, like there are a lot of major pop cultural works, but the hatedom is absolutely from the fact that one, it was super popular, and two, it was super popular among teenage girls. Teenage girls one is really, really important. And that's something that it took me a while to really realize, I think because I had my internalized misogyny. I'm not like the other girls, I'm not like the other teens, I don't like boy bands, I don't read Twilight. I like anime and I read Anne Rice, like literally. That's me at like 16. I am grateful for this opportunity to dig into something that I previously have written off, and I'm also grateful to the fandom, the Twilight fandom, particularly in the recent Twilight Renaissance, for having such a healthy view of it, for having this self-awareness to be like, yeah, this is fucking silly, but it brings me joy, and who gives a shit? Like God bless you. Like that's the way we should be about most pop culture. But we get in our heads about it, especially at people my age, especially when we were younger, when we were teens. I don't know, maybe Gen Z is better with this, but millennials when we were teens, we were the worst, because like, God forbid you liked anything with sincerity. God forbid you didn't have ironic detachment. It was the worst. It's really bad. So I am very thankful for the opportunity to dig into this. I'm thankful for the distraction while living through COVID. Love having something to think about that's not this fucking pandemic. And though I want to give a bit of a caveat to any longtime fans watching this, I'm sure that many of my initial impressions will be things that like came to like 5 to 10 years ago, so sorry, but I haven't delved, besides the videos that I've mentioned, I haven't delved too much into like Twilight fandom or social media because I want to have like my own impressions. So just caveat there. A lot of this might be old hat to you. Maybe I'll have a fresh take. Maybe I won't. It's fine. It's quarantine. We're making YouTube videos. I don't need to justify anything. Oh, another thing. The other thing that made me want to dig into Twilight is finding out that Stephenie Meyer wrote and published not one, but two retellings of her first book. The one, I already forgot the titles of them, I'm sorry. But the one that's the same, but it's from Edward's perspective. And then the one that's mostly the same, but it's gender flipped. And that blew my mind. It actually made me want to read Twilight more because I was like, what author gets away with this? Maybe more writers do this than I think, actually. Maybe I'm wrong and I just don't know what I'm talking about. In which case, let me know. I'd be curious, actually, about other authors who have basically published fan fiction of their own work. Well, that's why it's so jarring to me, because I'm like, these are fan fiction tropes. Did she just do a fan fiction of her? What? So that made me want to get on the Twilight train, because I was like, I need to find out more about this. This is wild. So I'm gonna call these like my first impressions, my surface impressions. Just like, my first impression is obviously just like, this is a story that goes down easy. The novel is very digestible. I don't think Meyer's writing is great, but it's very easy to read. And that's important generally for commercial fiction, but also if you're writing for a young audience. So that makes sense. There are a lot of little interactions between Bella and her human friends and between Bella and Edward that I feel were not really plot necessary, that they could have been cut out. I think this book could have been a lot shorter. I mean, I know Harry Potter made the, like, you know, children's YA door stopper book an acceptable thing, so they can just do that, but I think it could have been edited down more. Okay, the Sparkable thing, genuinely funny. I did find that funny when it got to the meadow scene where he was sparkly, though I think the part that's actually more funny is that Edward and his vampire family choose to live in the Pacific Northwest, specifically because of the lack of sunlight. I feel like that's almost a subtle drag on the Pacific Northwest or something. I was not saying anything, no shade to the Pacific Northwest. It is less funny to me than that Edward sparkles. It is even more funny to me that he lives in Washington State because of the sparkle problem and because it would make him too obviously non-human to the humans. That's fucking hilarious. Another random observation. Edward slyly says at one point that he believes in creationism. I'm not making this like it's so subtle and like brief, but it's definitely there, and it's hilarious. And yeah, I'd already seen this on social media that like Edward, had he not been turned by Vampire Daddy Carlisle, that he would have died in the 1918 flu pandemic. And yeah, reading this during a pandemic, it is kind of darkly funny. Like, what would Edward be thinking about COVID-19? I don't know. Maybe in the Twilight universe, vampire doctors are making more vampires to save people. I'm gonna stop myself. I need to stop myself. Bella's human friends are so boring. Like, they're really... And I realized, after I was fed up with being bored of them, that they're written that way intentionally. So, sort of contrast with Edward's way more interesting. Like, Edward is generally more interesting, but it's not because I find the type that he represents alluring or attractive. It's just because, like, he's a vampire, so he's inherent, and he does weird shit, and he acts really weird, so he's inherently more interesting than Bella's boring friends. But, you know, then I realized that obviously that's so the story moves in a certain way. But I think it's also another spot where Meyer has tapped into a very authentic teen thing, because when you're a teen, you're starting to think a bit more like an adult. You're starting to have that mental capacity, even though you're not quite an adult. And so you are more aware, I think, of your peers being tiresome and immature in a certain way, because you're starting to actually be a bit more mature. And so, yeah, that just actually comes off as more authentic. So of course, Edward seems more interesting and adult because he's a 100-year-old, 17-year-old. So that tracks. The most teenage thing about Edward is the fact that he's a music bro and he's like kind of a music snob, and I think that's one of actually his most aggravating traits. I hate to say it, is that he's a music snob. Why does he have CDs though? Like in 2005, for a teen to have CDs, that makes sense. I was a teen in 2005, I can attest. But wouldn't he have like outdated media? Like wouldn't he have like a record collection? It would be funny if Edward had a record collection from the 60s, because he lived through the 60s, and then it became like relevant and made him seem cooler later because records came back into fashion. That would be interesting. So one of the like teen things that Stephenie Meyer gets the most right, in my opinion, is what I like to call the teenage pine, and that is like the feeling when you're a teenager when the object of your affections is not around, when they're like not at school, and the way you think about them and the way you wish that they were there. Like that, like I'm embarrassed to admit how accurate it is, because I have to acknowledge that it made me remember when I was a teen and I felt that way about somebody else. Like, it's alarmingly accurate. And yet again, I would speculate this is a big part of the success of the novels, is that she can tap into this raw emotionality. She's good at that. Like I said, I was an Anne Rice teen, so I want to do some comparisons to Anne Rice. I want to say I did not reread any Anne Rice books in preparation for this. This is all based on my just my recollections of having read them, so my comparisons might not be 100% accurate, but I still want to do some comparisons here. I think Stephenie Meyer read at least some of the Anne Rice Vampire Chronicles. I don't know if she's admitted that in interviews, I don't know if that's been written up anywhere, but on the basis of reading this, I think she has. Now, certainly both Twilight and the Vampire Chronicles draw on other vampire media that predates both of them, but I think Stephenie Meyer read Anne Rice. So some of the parallels are just like the sexy, refined vampires, the fact that vampires are attractive at all, so, as opposed to like the classic Nosferatu, and this fact that they are portrayed as being like very refined, because Anne Rice's vampires are very high class and attractive. Even like specific descriptions of them, like the descriptions of them as being like marble, having skin like marble. I think that's right out of Anne Rice. I'm pretty sure. Vampires having a conscience and feeling guilt about hurting human beings, wondering about the status of their own souls. That's very Anne Rice. That's straight up Louis in Interview with the Vampire. That's one of the things. That's why he wants to like talk to somebody. He wants to work through his guilt about what he is. So that's interesting. I was gonna say Meyer's approach is more overtly Christian. I actually don't know if that's true, because I think the Vampire Chronicles have a lot of Christian themes. I just want to give a general caveat. I am Jewish. I'm from a mixed Jewish Christian family, so I have many Christian relatives, and obviously I grew up in a society where most people are Christian and where a lot of media has Christian themes. So I think I'm as equipped to sense this as most people, but just disclaimer, I am actually Jewish, so there might be things that I don't pick up on because it's not like my culture. It's interesting, a lot of people have commented on how Meyer's Christianity, and specifically her Mormonism, are very present in Twilight. And while Christianity is very present in the Vampire Chronicles, I don't think it's hard to say, because Anne Rice, after writing the Vampire Chronicles, became very Christian and actually devoted her writing to Jesus and wrote books about the life of Jesus. But at the time she wrote the Vampire Chronicles, that's not how she would have described herself. But then at the same time, maybe in some way subconsciously that was present. But it is interesting that Christianity plays a big role in both of their lives in different ways. One like small thing is both franchises have a vampire character named Laurent. I think the Laurent, so far it seems the Laurent in Twilight is more important than the Laurent in the Vampire Chronicles, so it's been a long time since I read the Vampire Chronicles, but, and it could just be a coincidence, but I think it's interesting that because it's not a super common name, especially in the Anglophone world. It's not a super common name. Vampire Chronicles has more of a tie to Francophone culture because of the settings in Paris and New Orleans, but it's a thing that they have in common. I'll say that much. It's a thing that they have in common. The big difference is vampires sparkle in Twilight. They do die in the sun in Vampire Chronicles, from what I remember. I don't know how else to say this, but vampires fuck in Twilight. This doesn't happen in the first book, but it's mentioned. Edward and Bella literally have a discussion where Edward makes it clear that he could destroy. It's very uncomfortable, actually. It's very straight. They don't, in the Vampire Chronicles, they don't have that drive anymore. It's not clear to me how much they have that drive in Twilight, though it's certainly more than in the Vampire Chronicles. In the Vampire Chronicles, bloodlust is very much a substitute for sexual lust, or it's expressed that way. It's very, the bloodlust is very erotic in the Vampire Chronicles. I feel like it's less erotic in Twilight, but maybe that's also because the vampires that we interact with most of the time are so into like not drinking human blood specifically. I don't know, it's an interesting comparison. Okay, here's the big themes. Here's the part I'm going to call Welcome to My TED Talk, because these are the big themes that I identified. One of them is like Edward does feel like an old-timey grown-ass man at times in a way that is a bit creepy and uncomfortable. I know it's supposed to make him more alluring because he's like more mature and interesting, but it does come home the fact that Bella, though she is precocious and quite smart, is a child, and he is not, and it's uncomfortable. Though he can, and people have said that he is a bit controlling, and he is. I mostly ended up being annoying with him for just kind of like being annoying little shit, and for like laughing at Bella's foibles at different points, which actually is his most teenage boy trait. Like Edward's tendency to just like act like a little shit and like laugh at Bella when she falls down is his most teen trait. He truly is 100-year-old, 17-year-old. Truly. So there's this very deliberate juxtaposition of Edward's maturity and Jacob's lack of maturity, because he's just a normal teen. And you could, say it is because Edward is physically 17 and Jacob, I think, at this point is just turned 15, which makes, because Bella is also 17, so that makes him 2 years younger than her, and he still has a bit more of a boyishness about him. And that contrast is groan-inducing enough without one of them literally being more than 100 years old. So I know enough about criticism of Twilight to know that a frequent criticism is that Bella is a damsel in distress. I don't think that's entirely fair. I don't think she completely fits that trope because at least she doesn't fit the trope the way I think of it, because she's not passive enough. She's actually quite active in many ways. For example, when she's alone on the street being pursued by like 4 dudes, like a terrifying scenario. She's prepared to fight back. She's thinking of like putting her keys between her fingers and like poking out eyeballs. Like she's thinking about stuff like that. She's ready to fight, which I respect, because in that situation, I don't know what I'd probably just run. So I don't think she does in the way she behaves necessarily. Actually, she actively sometimes looks for danger, though she usually feels compelled by something to do so, by looking out for someone else or feeling like she has to contact someone else or some other thing. But Like, that is an area where Edward's criticism is accurate. She unnecessarily looks for danger. The narrative does put her in a damsel in distress situation. Like, the structure of the story does put her in that relationship with Edward where he's a savior for her, and Stephanie Meyer is definitely into that. And the story is structured so that Bella needs Edward to look out for her because of the actual dangers that just seem to find their way to her. A lot of the dangers are because of him in some way, that her association with him puts her in danger. So as a result, he has to look out for her. So I think the criticism is valid in that the story is structured that way, but I don't think Bella's character is that of a damsel in distress, if that makes sense. One of the big themes in this novel, and I have a feeling the rest of the series is going to follow this, is that everyone has like one ultimate soulmate. And the vampires really exemplify this, especially in the Cullen family, because except for Edward, they're all paired off in these monogamous, long-term relationships that are expected to last for literally eternity because they're immortal. And the other members of the Cullen family actually worry about Edward a little bit because he doesn't have a partner, so they're relieved when Bella comes along, despite all of the problems of him being in a relationship with a human present. This situation of having one forever partner is presented as ideal, and Edward's relationship with Bella and the other vampire partnerships are presented as preferable in contrast with Bella's human friends who have more fleeting teenage relationships and flirtations and the things that teens do. And that's part of how Edward is contrasted as more interesting, more, I don't know, principled, and generally more idealized than Bella's human peers, who she would normally be hanging out with. It is also presented as positive that both Edward and Bella have not had a partner before each other. It is not explicitly stated, but I think the implication is that they're also both virgins, which goes into a more conservative Christian ideal of partnership. Another very Christian thing about Edward's family is their resistance to their own bloodlust, which is presented as a very noble resistance to physical temptation. And it's interesting that, you know, Vampire Daddy Carlisle, his father from his human life was an actual pastor, and he acknowledges that his father was a zealot and that he did some bad things, but it's obvious that Carlisle internalized this shame about what he is as a vampire and feels the need to atone for it, which is, you know, which I'm not necessarily think is a bad thing in that world. I mean, if I found myself turned into a vampire, maybe I'd do the same thing, because I don't know if I want to eat people, you know? But it's just very overt. The bloodlust is not as overtly sexual in Twilight as it is in the Vampire Chronicles, in my opinion, or at least from what I remember it being very erotic in the Vampire Chronicles. In most cases, I feel like with Bella specifically, Edward's bloodlust is very sexual. And actually, now that I think of it, maybe James's too. Perhaps James's interest in Bella is analogous to an older sexual predator trying to target a teenage girl. She could also say Edward. But it's preferable. There's a lot happening. So, in conclusion, Twilight is a really engaging and fascinating and kind of buck wild thing to read, and I'm glad that I started reading it. I'm kind of surprised I didn't get into it before. I mean, thanks, pandemic, I guess. It's very fun to dig into. It's very fun to dissect. I see why people like it so much. It is very uniquely American, I think. Like the conservative Christian value backdrop, frankly, the use and abuse of native legend. I didn't talk about that too much because it wasn't as big of a deal in this novel because Jacob is not as big a character. Basically, Stephenie Meyer took a real native tribe, fabricated legends for them that fit the narrative she wanted to have in her book, and then ran with it, which is not cool to do. But doing that's very American, like taking something created by indigenous people and using it for your own ends without asking their permission makes it more an American story. I'm not saying in a good way. I'm not saying I'm just saying that's a thing we have done in the United States for a very long time, and so Twilight fits into that very solidly. One thing that I'm struck with, and maybe as I read more of the series this will change, or maybe it'll be solidified more, is this is written like a romance, but it's really a horror story. It really is about a young woman who could have had a normal life being drawn into something dark that consumes her life to a really alarming degree. And I guess you could argue, she was destined to do this, or she's naturally attracted to the supernatural and it's just part of her and it's something that she always would want and all that, but it's alarming to me the degree to which she wants to be this undead thing, because there's nothing wrong with like living a normal human life and living and growing up and dying. Like there's something beautiful about that, and it saddens me how easily she wants to give that up. And this is another thing where Edward's actually right, where the Cullens are right, because they're very aware of the loss of their own humanity. Alice is very aware of the fact that she has no memory of it, so she never really got to have it in the first place. So it'll be interesting to see how this progresses. I kind of know a bit, again from osmosis, how it does progress, but I'm going to withhold saying anything until I've actually gotten to those parts of the series. So am I a person who likes Twilight now? I guess so. What has the pandemic done to me? Do you have any big pop cultural franchises that you've changed your tune about over the years, that you've rethought of, that you've seen in a different way? Do you have something that you've turned to during the pandemic for comfort? Is there a piece of pop culture that you think gets unnecessary hate, that is way underrated, or that it's silly but you like it anyway? Let me know in the comments. But take care, be safe, bye.